Bonjour à tous et bienvenue. Merci.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session, number 30, which is going to take place for about 55 minutes on a theme which is at the heart of the news at the moment. What is the role of companies in society? My name is Emmanuel Kastler. I am editorial director of Prisma Media and the monthly magazine Capital, and also management. And these press titles are very much in interaction with companies and society. If we look at recent developments, when the Parliamentary Assembly recently proposed banning Twitter, and the biggest French company was prevented from being the sponsor of the 2024 Olympic Games, and NGOs and a major French bank are in legal litigation about the financing of fossil fuels. We can see that the interaction between companies and society is becoming stronger and stronger, and more characterized by conflict. Where does the role of companies stop? In addition to producing goods and services, which is their main initial purpose. So we're going to talk about this with our guest. We have Ariel Mendez, who's a member of the Cercle des Économistes, who's coordinating the debate, the Vice President Delegate of Law and Economy at the Aix-Marseille University. We have Brice Rocher, President of the Rocher Group. We have Manuel Malecas-Doublé, CEO of the PMU, Julien Carmona, who is the Chairman of Credit Mutuel Arkéa, Johannes Hout, partner and Chairman of the Investment Fund, KKR, for Middle East, Europe and Africa, and Robert Zarda, economist and CEO of Bonafide. We don't have much time, so of course you can ask your questions in the audience, either directly in the room, don't hesitate to raise your hand, and also online, because I have a little tablet here which enables me to receive the questions from people who are following us remotely. So thank you, Ariel, first of all, for, as is tradition, for opening up this first session and giving us an introduction to say what are the issues relating to this debate about the role of companies in society, so that this discussion is useful and can add to the general running of the rencontre. As it's just been said, the question of the roles of companies in society is very much in the news at the moment. It's also a debate that has been taking place throughout the 20th century and exacerbates the situation of risk and crises, whether it's in the climate and political or environmental. We know that companies are at the heart of satisfying our needs. If I look at the definition by INSEE, the main purpose of companies is to produce goods and services for the market. So in fact, in reality, the companies have a social purpose, which is very important, but which is always associated with creating economic value, because the exchanges are usually monetarized. This objective of creating an economic value is that therefore their main end purpose. Historically in France, this debate was decided upon. The role given to companies was indeed to create economic value for their partners, and this economic role was very quickly included in the Civil Code, Article 1034, and this economic role was inscribed in the Civil Code on a permanent basis. In the academic sphere, the main purpose of companies was not really called into question throughout the 20th century until the 1980s, although the concept of social responsibility of enterprises, CSR, began to be measured in the 1950s with Anna Bowen, and if you remember, for some of you, in the 1970s, Milton Friedman stated that the only responsibility of a company was to maximize its profits in order to create value for shareholders. At the same time, a little later, the theory of stakeholders, popularized by Robert Friedman, supported a different view, orienting towards the creation of partnership value. In this vision, company is responsible for all of its stakeholders, not only its shareholders. If we look at this theory of stakeholders, companies are now not in an economic role, but also a social and environmental role. Without a legal translation, we know that social responsibility is an optional possibility that depends on the goodwill of the companies. I'm not a specialist in law, so I'm not familiar with international law in this area, but in any case, in France, the Pacte law of 2019 represents an important step forward by modifying Article 1034 of the Civil Code. It requires each company to be managed in its own interest, of course, but also taking account of social and environmental aspects of its activity. This PACT plan for action of growth and transformation of enterprises, gives a broader definition of the purpose of companies. So they have three roles: economic, social, and environmental role, instead of just an economic role. And these correspond and relate to the increasing expectations of society, employees and consumers and suppliers, looking for more meaning in their work. And so a major step was taken. This is defined in the legal framework. This raises new questions about how these roles are implemented in concrete terms in their organizations, and this raises a lot of questions. I won't list all of them. I'll just mention the main ones. Are these different roles, can they be reconciled, and if so, how? Using which business model can they be supported? Do we need to invent new value proposals, new ways of making profits, and new operational models? And in particular, what are the governance and management principles are required? Do all the companies have the same capacity to combine all of these? And if we answer no, the question is, how do we support the companies in their transformation? All of these questions are important because the confirmation of the PACT law did not guarantee the effective execution in the changing of the role of the enterprises, and the mission-based companies are a good example of this. The mission-based companies, the beginning of 2023, we had about more than 1,000 of these in France. Most of these mission-based companies are quite young. More than 70% were created after 2010. 80% have less than 50 employees. This means they have a big need for support. And even for larger companies, for example, Danone, which is a victim of speculative funds, they need protection and support. These mission-based companies need to perhaps rethink their means of governance and regulation. I've almost finished this introduction. I'd just like to cover a provocative question asked by a sociologist, Yves-Marie Braga. Are companies necessary? This is an interesting question. Today, in a socio-economic system as it functions, the answer, of course, is yes. As I said in my introduction, companies create goods and services we require and have a social purpose in our societies. They are a major player in our economic system. They have to be a major economic player, also in the social and ecological transition as well. And there, the role of the public authorities is to help them be engaged in these roles using all of their creative power. And I'll over now to our guests to see how they use all of their creative power to play the different roles that they have been assigned. Thank you, Ariel, for opening up the prospects, and we'll now continue. I take 2 points from what you've said, which may be interesting for you, Brice Rocher, the chairman of the Rocher Group since the month of June. You left the management team where you had been working for 14 years in this family-run company founded by your grandfather. Today is a much more international group than 15 years ago, a leader in cosmetics and plant-based cosmetics, and you're the first international group to adopt this status of a mission-based company. You also author of a report that was handed to the government just before the law was adopted. So in fact, Ariel Mendes told us that sometimes there was a gap between the principle of mission-based engagements and CSR and the reality and the effectiveness. And a lot of people are skeptical about this. And Ariel, you said something which is also important, which is that the state helps companies to fulfill their societal role above and beyond their production capacities. Should we help them, or should we force them to play other roles? To answer this question, isn't societal engagement something that can be seen as something that's a bit of a cosmetic? If you don't mind that little joke, Yves Rocher, about Yves Rocher. I have some convictions, but it's not even a conviction, it's just an established fact. A company only functions through its financial capital and human capital. The human capital is innovative production, the culture of values. And without that, because at the end of the day, a company is a collective group of people, men and women, and talents, which is always a good thing as well. The company is there to produce products and services for customers. Well, not only. It also contributes to creating a collective enterprise and with a specific collective approach. And the status of our mission-based company, I'd like to say that for the first time in its history, the internal corporate culture now has its legal backup. That's interesting in itself because it means we can develop this human capital further. And if you just look at the financial capital only, you won't go very far, from my point of view. So for me, yes, there's always a risk of purpose washing. Maybe it might just seem to be cosmetic, except that this status does have a number of safeguards. And this makes it legitimate from my point of view. The first safeguard is that you have a mission committee, which is there to produce a report on the realization of the objectives the company has set itself in terms of its mission. In other words, the areas in which it has decided to take action. And all of this is certified by a third-party independent entity, a body which will certify or not, or with the reservations, determining whether or not the company has achieved the objectives it set itself in relation to its missions and its struggle. From what I've seen, for me, the Rocher Group since 1959 has been involved in this kind of work. It's not becoming a purpose-based emission company in more recently that we suddenly started to take this approach. Ever since the beginning of the company, we have taken this approach. Ever since the experience my grandfather had in the beginning, it's a struggle in favor of nature, and the point is to reconnect people to nature. By adopting this purpose-based company, we have made explicit something which was too implicit internally. And this is in relation to the employees, the men and women we employ. This has a specific, very powerful virtue, and which we were able to measure through the daily commitment and the pride of belonging of the employees to the company. And so this is essential because we carry out Pelos surveys. I can tell you that at the worst time of the COVID crisis, where we had to reorganize, we didn't all experience this COVID crisis in the same way with the various lockdowns that we had to go through. Not everybody had their holiday home that they could go to in the countryside. I was convinced of one thing at that time, which was that the commitment of the men and women working for us internally, I was sure that their commitment was going to go down compared to before the COVID crisis. In fact, it's much greater now. I don't mean by that that the specific status as a mission-based company has helped to do that, but I think it has helped. This makes it explicit, something which is too implicit from my point of view. I think this is essential. What do we make explicit? It's the reason for being of the company. Just hand over to the other speakers. And to conclude on this point, if the reason for a company to exist is honey, the mission-based company is royal jelly. What is the reason for being Rocher? To reconnect people to nature. Why is that? In fact, my grandfather always had a lot of health problems, quite serious health problems. And so, in fact, when he was very young, his parents had to give him homeschooling. He couldn't go to school. And so it made him very close to his father, except that when he was 14, his father died. This was in 1944 in a small village in Brittany. And this terrible family event caused him to go and live in the forest for 2 years. He wasn't living in the woods all the time, he didn't sleep in the woods all the time, but he was in very close contact with nature. This was enabled to him to be soothed and enabled him to see that nature has a positive impact on us as human beings, and saw that nature had a positive impact. When he created the company 10 years later, he sought to reconcile economic performance and a kind of societal commitment. In other words, the struggle to protect nature. Economic performance, why was that? Because he didn't have any finance himself, so he had to work hard right from the very beginning. And also this struggle to defend nature was because of this experience he had living in the woods for 2 years. So this is due, therefore, to the personal experience that my grandfather had when he was 14 years old. And this constantly enriched his professional career, and we're trying to sustain this now through our family today. Thank you, Brice Rocher. We'll come back with you to talk about the challenge this represents and the difficulties and the tensions that can exist for a company that makes cosmetics and also has industrial processes to comply with and in the manufacturing process. I'll now hand over to Emmanuel Malcaz-Doublé. The last year, you have been the young CEO of the PMU, which is the Paris Mutual Urbain. You've been working for them since 2018. PMU is an economic interest grouping. It's the leading horse racing betting company in the world. In France, you have a monopoly on horse racing, but not horse racing betting, but not online. You have 75% of your income is from bets, and also you have other sources of income. You don't have a status as a mission-based company, as Yves Brice-Rocher has defined it in the Pacte law, which he has looked at and which he has adopted himself. Does this mean that, in fact, without having the legal characteristics, that you also are a mission-based company? I'd like to start by saying that as the CEO of the PMU, I'm also often astonished that I'm asked a lot of questions about the figures and the performance of the company, but not very much about the purpose of our company. And yet I would say that by definition, we are a mission-based company. Why did I say that by definition? Because the 800 million euros is our income, and these 8 million euros are completely, this is a profit, and so this is distributed to the horse racing industry. This is, if you don't have any PMU, you won't have any horses left in France. So all of the money is invested back into the horse racing industry. Another mission, which is important to me, is social bonds. PMU represents conviviality. 14,000 bars and restaurants that have the PMU system in the bar. Everywhere in France, you have a bar using a PMU system. We have more outlets than the post offices are in France. So this is particularly the case in small villages, in rural areas where we play an important role, and we provide a physical source of social bonds. So concerning the role of our company, my conviction is the role of the company is to promote trust. Why do I say that? Because for the last 4 or 5 years, we've been talking about the meaning of companies. Of course, you have to have a meaning in what you do. With the new generations, you will never be able to recruit if you don't have some sort of meaning, if you don't give a meaning to your activity. I'd like to say that's perhaps now old hat, because what's happening now is our citizens want to have trust. You have to show that you are sincere, that you're authentic in what you do, and trust isn't an easy thing to obtain from people. You have to get people to trust you, the customers, your employees, and also all of the horse racing sector. It's not easy to do because this is a society of mistrust. People are always afraid. There's a lot of mission washing, as we talk about greenwashing. Yes, that's why I'm emphasizing that point. I'd like to give you a recent example. It's the most joyful example, but there have been riots recently. You must have seen this. We have 250 outlets which completely vandalized. When I say vandalized, I don't mean the windows were broken. I mean people went in and broke absolutely everything, burnt everything. The outlet has been destroyed. 250 out of the 14,000 is quite a lot. So what we've done, we have the Confederation of Tobacconists and other people involved in our activity. Very quickly went into the field. We had 200 people who were assigned to go into the field to answer the telephone calls and to provide help in these outlets. And we took action more quickly than the state. I'm not saying the state shouldn't take action, of course, on the contrary. In fact, the Minister, Gabriel Attal, is preparing a plan to help these tobacconists, which will be communicated in the next few days. The agility of our company means that very quickly, in less than 48 hours, we were able to mobilize our people. We were able, of course, on the scale of the PMU, as we have 800 million profit every year. We're able to use our resources to provide this assistance very quickly. It's just an example to show that a company can act in a more agile way than the state and can be a source of trust. And this is how we were able to re-establish our trust, by being close to our partners, by showing that we were there to help them, and we were showing that they could trust us and have confidence in us. So we were helping them, and the rest of the year they are running the activity and giving us something in return. So it's sort of like a customer service action on our part to provide this support. I think it's a big move that has to be made to instill confidence and trust, and this is very important for our citizens. In the area of betting, there's a big issue with addiction and fraud as well online. It's rather paradoxical to give yourself a virtuous mission when you're often can tilt over to the other side. I don't think we're really tilting over to the other side. The PME can only be sustainable if we're responsible. We have people working on this. You talked about the online casinos. There any of you can look in the room. If you type online casino, you can bet, and it's completely illegal activity. Online casinos are illegal in France. They are not taxed. There's no prevention of excessive gambling, and we have a role to play to here again support people and see how we can regulate this activity. The activity, it exists. It represents 1 billion euros of turnover at the moment. There's a lot of work to do to protect our citizens by being more responsible, and also helping the government to regulate an activity which at the moment is completely illegal and is out of control. And on the last point that you mentioned about excessive gambling at the PMU, we have 20 people working specifically on this theme. We use big data to anticipate problems for people gambling excessively, and we can close down people's accounts if necessary. It's very important to us to look after people. Julia Camano, sorry, you're chairman of the Crédit Mutuel Arkea. You're based in Brest. You also work in the Nouvelle-Aquitaine region. Strong growth over the last few years, 11,000 employees, including 7,000 in Brittany. You've become a mission-based company in 2022, and you say that giving the non-financial performance of your group the same importance as the financial results. This is what you said to me beforehand. It's rather surprising coming from a banking institution. So for you, the non-financial results are just as important as financial results? I find that difficult to believe. Well, I'll try to convince you that this is the case and explain it to you. Perhaps I can go back to what you said. You said we were a cooperative bank, a regional cooperative bank. So let's come back to the status. We are a cooperative mutualist bank. What does this mean? It means we don't have any shareholders. The shareholders are our customers, who we call the members. Then it's a democratic organization, one vote for each person. So the whole governance of the group is the result of the actions by the customers and by the society at the local level. We have a Crédit Mutuel Arkea. We have 300 local outlets in small villages and towns. At the Crédit Mutuel, overall, this represents 2,000. We have a local bank. You have your bank advisors, and you have a board of directors who represents the local company. So in mine, there will be a nurse, a company director, a retired engineer, a teacher. You have a kind of like a slice of society. And in this context, where it's really the elected representatives who determine the activity and actions of our group, the question of what our role is in society, in fact, it speaks for itself. And in fact, it's to enable to be beneficial for society. I'll come back to the question of profit and non-financial criteria. The only way we can grow, we have grown a great deal, they've been around for more than 100 years. The only way is to put the income back into company. We reinvest it back. There are no dividend, and this enables us to continue growing. So this is beneficial to the local companies, what we call the stakeholders. I'd like to talk about social, environmental, and territorial responsibility. These are our three aspects that we work on. In this area, I think this mission-based status helps us, although it's not a guarantee of virtue. This pact law of creating mission-based companies. Brice Rocher was a pioneer. We joined this, started getting this status last year. This means we have a different model, especially for our younger employees who wanted to have a meaning for what they were doing. It's not as simple as that in practice. It's, as Ariel Mendes was saying, you can have objectives that are very good in themselves that are contradictory. This management of contradictions is the essence of a mission-based company and also the problem for companies today. Imagine that in Brittany you finance agriculture a great deal, which doesn't always protect the environment. Yes, absolutely, it can be an abattoir in Brittany, which is the only employer in the local area, and they create jobs which wouldn't exist otherwise, and they pollute the water, and they generate emissions as well. I'd like to thank you for that question. So to deal with that, we have an accounting tool which is unique today, which consists in measuring the externalities of everything we do ourselves and everything that our customers do when we finance them. So to put it simply, the development of our customers makes it possible to create jobs which wouldn't exist without us. We reason in the differential way. This means we play a part in producing these jobs when our activity and our customers' activities means that there is an emission of a lot of CO2, and we all know that can become unacceptable. There's also a contribution to the emission of CO2, which will also be included in the non-financial results. It doesn't solve everything, but it's a way of defining the subject. So we have the financial results and the non-financial results, which can be positive or negative. And I'd like to end we're saying that our original business is 600 and 800 million, and the impact of our balance sheet is 9 billion in social, environmental, and territorial impact, and more than 1 billion of destruction of environmental value. How do we do that? How we do balance those out? It's at least one way of talking about the subject of the contradictions. Perhaps I could say that despite your good intentions, the way you talk about the mutualist society is not always a world of Teletubbies either. Yes, it's true that in our case we have asserted our vision and we have reconciled the differences, and we have settled this with the rest of the Crédit Mutuel. I would say it's a world of consensus. Thank you very much, Julien Carmona. Of course, you will be able to answer some questions in a little while. Ioannis Souta, you are partner and chairman of the KKR Investment Fund for the Middle East, Europe and Africa. You're one of the biggest players in investment in the world, very much present in the European market, very much present also for more than 20 years, since 2002 in France in private equity, infrastructures and real estate and new technologies, about 40 companies in your portfolio. So Elsan, the biggest private hospital company, April, insurance broker, Nika as well. Your colleague was saying just now that maybe it's easier to be a mission-based company. We don't have shareholders. When the shareholders play an important role and they decide what's going to happen and they invest, can you define societal objectives for well-being and environmental and social protection? Thank you very much, Emmanuel.
Thank you. I will speak in English. I will answer in French to your questions, but there's simultaneous interpreting for those who wish to have it. So if I may start.
Virage to address this question that was asked about, do we still need a company? Do we still need this legal form of a firm? So what I've done is let's go back to economic theory. We are in the Rencontre économique, and economic theory on this comes from 1937 from Roland Coase, who won a Nobel Prize for his work in this area. And basically what he says is the reason companies exist is that they basically provide lower transaction costs between individuals than a loose association of individuals. So there's an economic reason for a firm to exist, which I don't think has gone away over the last 75 years since Roland Coase wrote his paper. So starting with that there is an economic reason, I come back to the question that you've asked is, what do we look for in the companies that we invest in? And are ESG or social criteria part of what we're looking for? And the answer is absolutely they are. But the key is, why is that the case? And I think that's, for me, the absolute critical point. And the reason is that it's good business for us, for these things to be part of the objectives of the companies that we invest in. Let me give you a few examples. And I start with a G in ESG, governance. In all of our companies, we insist that the boards of management are diverse, so that we have a good participation of different gender and different perspective in the boards. Why is that the case? The case is because it has been proven in many, many studies that diverse teams perform better than non-diverse teams. So it's good business for us to do this. Then let's talk about the environment. Every one of our companies, we insist, measures their carbon footprint. And we also ask them to show us a plan as to how they can improve that carbon footprint over the next 5 years. And we put in management's objectives that they will be measured on how they perform against this plan. Again, why are we doing this? We're doing this because it's good for the companies and it makes them better businesses. So effectively, I think that driver, the driver of good business, is what makes us do this. And I think we will continue to do this. We're in the leading front. Now, of course, this has changed over the past decade. And the reason it's changed is that the regulatory and societal environment has changed and made this decisions better business than maybe that was some time ago. So I think there is an interplay between the company, society, and the regulatory authorities, which drives this behavior to being more front-footed on these ESG criteria. Thank you.
Merci, Johannes. Robert Zarader.
Thank you, Johannes. You're from a consultancy firm, Bonafide. You're a strategy consultant. How do you analyze all that has been said earlier on? We have a lot of good intentions from companies. There's a strong will to become full-fledged actors of their own businesses, but also of the society at large. Is it reasonable, ultimately? You don't have any mic. Yeah. All right. So normally you each have a mic. This is what I was told. Does it work? Hello? Thank you for the invitation. Well, the school year has ended, so I will not abide by any instructions, and I will play this mischievous guy. We have given a name to companies. They had a limited responsibility, and they should be also joint stock companies. And I'm referring back to an Eddie Mitchell song talking about the Société Anonyme, the joint stock company, or a private limited company. And this refers me back to the front page of the Provence newspaper when we talk about Mylène Farmer's song Désenchanté, which means disenchanted with this world. And that echoes, and we should acknowledge what is happening now and which is very important. Everything is built in-house, and the mission purpose, the mission-focused companies is important in-house. Being mischievous, I could talk about a certain ways in being in playing that game and in having mission-focused companies. So being useful to the society, making the world progress. I'm not going to play this game. And nature also, reconnect men to nature, yes. But I don't want to tackle all the subjects. The first point is that the nature of the company is old. Already in the 60s, that was an issue. That is at a time when those that under 20, the young people shaped that kind of corporate world, and it's quite interesting. The relationship with the corporate world was shaped at the time, and it is in line with what we're talking right now, namely as a financial and societal stakeholder. But there's a resistance to this private sphere. And I would like to say something, because when we talk about mission-driven companies, sustainable development, responsible companies, we take note of something that is already in existence. And for any job applicant, it is actually the minimum that is required. That's the minimum that we could accept. We have enacted a lot of laws on that point. We have fleshed out legislative content for this, but this is secondary in my opinion. Beyond the ecosystem of the company, a survey has been carried out recently. 25% can say what is a purpose-driven and 10% can talk about a raison d'être. The figures are quite low, but it has an immediate interest for the in-house ecosystem of the company. As for the rest, we feel that it's only hypocrisy. We talk about responsible companies, CSR-driven companies, and so on and so forth. But what is really important, and what seems really important for me, is not how companies adjust and are included in the society, but how they will resist to the society trends. I will give you a few instances. And that's part and parcel of the wokeism trend. And I will talk about how the US influenced France. When the Disney boss in Florida criticizes DeSantis on the prohibition of having sexual education lessons in Florida, they go from the 5th favorite company to the 77th favorite company. When Bud Light, for instance, the beer producing company, chooses as an influencer, as an ambassador, an influencer who's defending LGBT rights, they lose $5 billion of stock value, of stock exchange value. When you have a big American distributor that decides to have the Pride Month after 8 months and after a lot of attacks from the social medias, they need to go backwards. So there's a real subject as to resistance vis-à-vis the society, to vis-à-vis society phenomena. Why? Because society has evolved with 3 elements that are really crucial. The first of which is the feeling that we are totally disconnected from the world. It is not the case when we are in a company, but at the macro level, we are totally disconnected. And it plays also a role inside the corporate world. And then there are 2 important movements: polarization, radicalization. And these movements are influencing the corporate world. I'm going to talk about something which is quite surprising. In a large French company, a boss will take decisions as to the business unit and present herself or in front of the salaried employees. And after the presentation, after first contact with the managers, they would decide that she's lesbian. Very sincerely, nowadays, all these subjects are of concern to me. Why? Because we see now that there's a strong porosity in these society phenomena. We can have different opinions. I'm not judgmental here, but I'm taking stock of the situation. We're lagging behind. We're regulating the environmental aspects, the climate change-driven aspects, and it's all good. But afterwards, be careful with the next wave, with the next tsunami, which has sped up with home working. Home working has entailed a permeability of the private sphere within the corporate world, and the corporate world will have to bear with that. And I'm going to talk about a trend that is quite interesting, another phenomenon, namely religious practice inside the corporate world, inside the corporate walls. There has been a report that is being fine-tuned on this subject. In 90% of the cases, there's no problem. In a normal framework, within discussions with your line managers, you can manage the way in which religious practices are accepted in the corporate world. But for 20% of cases, especially for SMEs, it is dramatic. Why? Because this creates controversies, community gaps, and divides, and it's difficult to manage for business managers. And I would like to say a last word. I'm not a Credit Mutuel agent, but What is interesting in what Crédit Mutuel has done, and seldom to find, is that the boss imposed a rule of 120. They cannot earn 20 times more than the minimum salary. Do you agree with that rule? With this 120 ratio? Do you like it? I know this rule very well, and in a lot of my companies, we actually apply this rule. Good. Okay. Does someone want to react to what has just been said? Because the debate has been completely reversed as to the mixture of society within company. That's the woke capitalism. They have remarked a phenomenon that has been translated into the fact that the Silicon Valley Bank had a chief diversity officer but not a chief risk officer. So are we drifting away from what should be done? Can we stop it? Well, before you can actually speak about this, well, honestly, if the Silicon Valley Bank had such problem, it's not because they were not woke, it's because in the banking world they just lacked the right competences. They did not have the right skills. Well, our society is a small society. Is it good? Is it no good? Well, that's the way it is. Permeability exists. We have to manage it. It is true with these financial objective issues, but other surrounding issues, the society has become an agora. We discuss about everything. Maybe it's something good because we're preparing ourselves to these new subjects coming up. When we say, okay, we're about to stop to finance it if we can't stop these trends, but for the guy living in the proximity and the one living 100 kilometers away, they do not have the same point of view. There's a company, there's a society within the company, and points of view are different, but it's also interesting to have different points of view. And the aim is to survive altogether. So if we do not do all of this, we will be considered as non-relevant, unbearable, and we will disappear altogether. We need to survive. And that means that we need to open up to this new pressure, to this new permeability with the society at large. Would someone like to raise their hands and ask a question? Yes? Please introduce yourself beforehand. Please stand up. We have 10 minutes left, so the questions need to be short. I come from the youth delegation in the community of the Green Rising Stars. I'm part of the youth delegation. How do you create trust for the young people? How do you allow them to feel good in the company and to feel trustful for this, these environmental objectives? How do they feel about this? I will answer to that question because that's an important issue at stake for my company. It's not a problem. We talk about youth. I started when I was 34 years old. I took over the management when I was 34 years old. If we're performant, if we inspire trust, if we have a vision for the long term for the company, it's not a criterion. In my own company, I always try to instill that vision. It never was a problem for me. And within PMU, those who are promoted are those who deserve it, no, notwithstanding the gender or the age, because that was also a matter. When I had a seat at the board of directors, I was the only woman. And this is what I'm trying to push forward in terms of topics. We have to start by our own company when we want to promote values within the society at large. May it be for youth-related topics or for gender equality topics. Thank you. Another question in the back. And then there's a lady as well. Louise, I'm a member of the Green Budding Stars generation. You're very proactive in your approach, in your business models. Within the legal framework of mission-focused company, it is very perfectible and it's not compulsory for SMEs under 50 employees. So I wonder, are we going to lose this quality? Are we going to withdraw it from the legal articles of association if we do not show that we are good enough when there's an audit? What do you think about this? Well, this status as and the B Corp and the B Corp status are complementary. It's the raison d'être of the company, and it means putting up a fight, sacrificing other things, obviously, but that means committing the company within a fight for the benefit of the employees. Not doing it in a way that would mean foregoing economic profitability, because at the end of the day, what is important is not figures. It's the ladies and gentlemen that work within the company. They need to work together. They need to feel good when they work within this company. And this is where you have an added value. The B Corp status, well, it's to be in compliance with a lot of issues, may it be in terms of governance, environment, CSR, and so on. It's more of a certificate. It's a label certificate. As for us, it's nature. But when we say this, we could be lagging behind on diversity, equality, and so on. But having this B Corp status, our turnover falls into the scope of B Corp status, and that actually plays the role of a watchdog. And investing as soon as today will serve a purpose outside this legal framework that will be to the benefit of the company, because anyway the law will impose it on us at a given time. So let's anticipate things. It will be less painful for the company afterwards, rather than waiting for the bill of law to be enacted and to be imposed upon us. Hello, my name is Dina Fourneret. I'll speak slowly, because I'm aphasic. I had a stroke and I lost my tongue. And this explains why I'm speaking slowly. I was told that it would be better for me to come, and I'm delighted to have come. Because renewing hope is our job every day, every morning when we wake up. Making choices is essential, because it's the same. We need to move forward. We need to be proactive and forward-looking and constructive in our approach. I'm not going to dwell too much on my question, but we have to manage to listen to one another, especially with people that have the same problem as I do, or anyone that has had a stroke, because the brain has been split open, and we're not the same person overnight. Everything that you have explained for the society, well, it's different from us, because our life on a daily basis, well, life at work is what is essential for us, because if we don't have a life at work, we have no life at all. And this is our logic. I don't know how to phrase my question as I should, but please listen to this idea. And please come and see me afterwards to defend aphasic impulse that I'm trying to trigger, to try to find a bridge between the rencontre économique and entrepreneurs, and to come in Ramatuelle and Saint-Tropez and to work with the aphasic people and crew members to talk together and build bridges. So, we have 2 minutes left, but there was a question online. We should help those that are working for the world. To do so, do you see another path rather than taxing the less virtuous companies? This is quite interesting. Should we tax those that are less virtuous, that are less proactive? Well, that's a perspective, that's an opinion. We could consider this. It's a way of making things progress. It's not the only one, but that's one possibility. Amongst the different considerations that we mention, there's one thing we never mentioned, as the economists would say, and I was an economist, we have to talk about the external adversely affecting considerations. We can talk about training, health, and this matter is very important. Indeed, this would require, because this is being done in other fields, for non-virtuous companies and those that contribute to that and that type of climate change, we could consider taxing them. But in the first debate that we had this morning, Mr. Pouyanné must be in total disagreement with me. That is the debate, that is the controversy. We'll stop here. In a nutshell, in 20 seconds, as for woke companies, we ended up forgetting that companies are part and parcel of the society, and we should talk about it with economic anthropologists. Thank you for this conclusion. Thank you to all of you for having participated in this debate. We continue, and the day is not over.